this is the well-being track, of course, and I absolutely see resilience as part of that process. But I wanted to do. I know that we got some fabulous well-being speakers already, so I wanted to do, I guess, a slightly different angle on it. So I wanted to talk about building resilience. I spent most of my career not doing this. I started Reach Remarkable in 2012, went back to school, did masters in psychology and all that sort of stuff. Spent most of my career in the software industry. And I guess that we experience all sorts of things in doing that, from in roles as a technical engineer through to management, through to leadership and so on. And I guess you get to see all kinds of things throughout our lives and our careers. And I certainly think that building resilience is a valuable thing to do, but as if we needed to be told that, building resilience is quite an intriguing challenge right now, isn't it, through this process that we've been through. And perhaps it is the challenge that we face that helps us build resilience. We'll see. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I absolutely think that building resilience is really important and really helpful in delivering on, I guess, what we want to deliver on. I guess you might simply say that it's about performance, but actually who I want to be in my life, I think, is hugely impacted by how resilient that I am in the life that I live. And as if we needed other support, there's some other people that we may have heard of that talk about the idea that resilience is important. One of the important words in here, though, is skill. And in fact, when scientists first started looking at resilience, it was thought it was one of those things you either had or you didn't. And I guess relatively quickly after that, we started to realize, no, hang on a minute, there are skills here. And so resilience is absolutely something we can develop. And maybe I'm preachers of the converted. Maybe you know that already. But I really do think it's a set of skills. And why do we need resilience? Well, adversity comes along, doesn't it? Life brings challenges. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the biggest change in our working environment and our lives probably that we've seen through COVID-19. And so adversity is absolutely normal. And adversity, of course, has an enormous range, from spilling coffee down my skirt or dress or shirt, whatever it may be, to being cut up on the way to work. Very simple challenges, through to things that are much more serious, through to perhaps ill health or losing somebody or a breakdown of a relationship, or perhaps a privacy issue in the organization that we work for that has affected thousands of people. There's all kinds of things that life brings us that represent adversity. And resilience, you might say then, is how we work with this. But it's important, I think, to realize that being resilient doesn't mean that we lack symptoms. In other words, something awful happens, it doesn't mean that we don't feel bad. It doesn't mean that when we spill coffee down our shirt that we don't feel bad about doing that. We don't feel silly about doing that. No, that's not what it's about. Resilience is a set of processes, but it doesn't mean a lack of symptoms. What does it mean? Well, I think that ultimately, and there's lots of ways of looking at this, and this is going to be one of my questions to everybody here, what is resilience for you? The way that I think about it is that if we have sets of resilience to deal with the things that we're going through, and of course different skills, different environments, we can be resilient in one area and not in another. But ultimately, I think it's about this idea of being able to function through adversity. Function perhaps not quite as well as I could previously without going through this, but function and at some level, function reasonably. And part of that functioning is the ability to mentally step back a little bit, and so that we can see a bigger picture. And that's a really important aspect of resilience. It often means too that we recover more quickly, and perhaps that we grow through adversity. We know, and we're all familiar with this idea that if things go wrong, we can grow through the adversity. There's one, I think, slightly pessimistic view that you can only ever grow through adversity. I'm not quite sure that's the case, but we know that it's an opportunity for growth. We might be very familiar with things like, I guess the wrong end, you might say, post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic stress isn't just something that happens to people that are in the military. It's a real thing. But it's also not the most common outcome to adversity. And where where we don't, where we don't end up suffering PTSD for some awful thing that's happened in our lives, there are lots of other options. Most of us will recover, but some of us will grow. Some of us will be a different person on the other hand of adversity. And so this idea that maybe I look back on something that's happened that's been a real challenge in my life, or my family, whatever it may be, and we may not wish for that thing that happened, but now we realize that we are different people because of it, so we have grown through it. And the notion of post-traumatic growth is absolutely a real thing, just like post-traumatic stress is a real thing. So resilience gives us this ability to potential to grow. So how do we build it? Well, there's this lovely Nietzsche quote that I'm sure all of us are familiar with: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And like all, pithy quotes, it's sometimes right and it sometimes isn't. And we don't always set things up, I think, the way that helps. I've heard all of these phrases in my working life. My favorite in many ways is that you're one of our best people. I know that we can rely on you to get this done. Or indeed just the environment. We've got great people. They'll be able to get through this challenge that we're going through now. This COVID thing, they'll be able to sort it out. And what that does, unfortunately, I suppose, and it's always well-meaning, I think, we're trying to help people by doing it, but almost we are implying by saying you're one of our best people, you'll get through this, is that we make it much more difficult for them to struggle. We make it much more difficult for somebody to struggle with something and come back and ask for help, because we've just set things up like they're the best that's going to be. And even the best going to need help. So what's real, I think, is that adversity sometimes leads to growth. But what is it that makes it the not leading to growth and leads to actually growing? Well, of course, there's a number of things. Let me describe what I think resilience is. Well, here's one way of looking at it anyway. I think resilience is a combination of skills. Skills, I want to talk about some of these, but an example of emotional intelligence is an intriguing skill, or the ability to see what I'm going through, a mindful skill. Judy's just described mindfulness. Being able to be mindful means that often we can see our experience rather than be directly in it. And that's incredibly helpful in being able to work with something rather than the challenge that I'm through working me, which is often is the case. So the skills. There's mindsets, how we look at life, how we think life is supposed to work, actually has a huge impact on how we react when things go wrong. Lovely set of studies that looked at if we think stress is harmful, it's more likely to be. And it's not that stress is never harmful, I'm not suggesting that for a second, but again, how we think about the things that we're going through absolutely impacts how we deal with them. And then it's support. And so support might be simply that I can come back to my colleagues and recognize, look, I need some help with this, and that's okay to do. Or it might be that there's professional support available, or it might be that there's coaching available, or it might simply be that the people that I'm around, the people that are close to me, support me in some way. We know that these things, the set of three things, has a big impact on the outcome, if you like. When we face adversity, the likelihood of it leading to growth, or at least good recovery. So what does it look like? I absolutely think it's these. What it provides, options and flexibility. If you look at the literature around resilience, there's lots of disagreement, but probably the thing that's most agreed upon is that what resilience provides us is the ability to be flexible in how we respond to something. Simply reacting to a situation, if we're very skilled in it, might work very well. But often when we face adversity, it's something that we're not used to. And therefore, what we really need is the ability to be able to step back and create a bigger perspective on what's going on. And so the ability to be flexible in response to something ultimately means often that we can function well through adversity. And how it manifests, well, the outcomes, yes, it might mean recovery, it might mean a growth. But also, it's if I have the skills, the mindsets, and the support for resilience, then it means that often I'm much more efficient use of my energy. Adversity is expensive, cognitively, physically expensive. And so having skills actually helps me improve my use of my energy. And I'll connect back to that in a moment. So this is one way of looking at resilience. This is what I think is helpful. And so, hang on a minute, then how do you build this resilience? Well, we're not all the same. What I've done here is created what I call the 6-element model, and it combines 5 ways to well-being. It combines the PERMA model of well-being. It combines models of resilience. It includes some of the Gallup information. Try to create. Hang on a minute. Let's have something that's structured so that we can understand it and we can put it into play. And what I'd like to do here is kind of touch on 3 aspects of this. So let me do that. Let me just kind of go straight for this. 3 keys then, I think, to building resilience. Well, this is a well-being track, and we have got some lovely discussions of well-being throughout this. And one of the outcomes of well-being is energy. You know, it's easy to forget, isn't it, that we are absolutely organisms. We need energy to operate. We know, I'm sure we've all experienced the idea at the start of the day, we're much better able to make a decision than we are maybe at 4 o'clock after we've had a busy day. So energy has a huge impact on all kinds of things. And certainly the ability to be resilient, energy is an important part of that. I sort of mentioned that earlier. The idea that adversity and challenge have a physical and a psychological cost. So well-being, one aspect of well-being is that we improve our reserve of energy, and that's enormously helpful for resilience. So one thing, I'm not going to discuss it anymore, there's plenty of other discussion going on in this track, well-being. Make well-being a priority if we want to develop and support our resilience. Number 2, what about meaning? And we've had some lovely discussion actually at the start of this conference about why an organization exists. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit to that. Maybe I'm not adding anything at all. But I want to talk about 2 things that relate to meaning that might be valuable. One is recognizing organizational value, having a cause for the organization. And Simon Sinek, in his book The Infinite Game, I think has written a lovely way of looking at this. And he describes 2 kinds of games. He describes the finite games and infinite games. And in a finite game, there are known players, there are known rules, there are known objectives. There's a time where we're going to end. And in fact, classical, sport are lovely examples of finite games. There are 2 teams or multiple teams of people come together using a set of rules, and in 90 minutes later, the game is finished and there's a winner or loser. Great example of a finite game. But often, organizations get into this mode of operating like a finite game. They operate the business like a finite game. It's very, very tempting. And so we get wrapped up in quarterly results. Or maybe it's rather than financial results, maybe it's budgets that we end up managing. The idea of winning at all costs, the idea of beating the competition, these are all very finite ways of looking at business. They're all things that fit beautifully in a temporary period for a game, but they don't fit quite so well for the long-term success of an organization. And it turns out that when you start to look at these things, they really don't support resilience. When things go odd, when the competition obviously comes in and does something different, when the world that we're in absolutely changes, this model really struggles. It doesn't support resilience in an organization. Whereas an infinite model, very different. In an infinite model, there are known but also unknown players, no absolute agreed rules, although there might be conventions or laws even. There's no time limit on this. There's no winning and losing. And so the goal of an infinite game is to continue to play it, to be around long enough to carry on playing it, to be able to stay in the game, if you like. And so in an organization that has this view, often the process is about outdoing ourselves. How can we improve on what we've been doing? How can we fundamentally take care of the people that we serve? How can we do the best by our customers, and how can we do the best by our employees? And so we take this idea of having a cause and operate with this sort of infinite model. And you end up almost automatically with a very much more resilient approach to business. So this is a sort of a business level look at things very briefly. What about an individual level of things? Well, there's some lovely studies looking at the impact of knowing who benefits from what we do. Who benefits from what you do in your role? Who are the individuals that benefit? How do they benefit? I often work in schools with school teachers, and one of the things that's really challenging, you'd think that if you're a school teacher, that there's absolutely a fabulous cause for what you're doing, and most of them are absolutely connected to it. But it's so easy to get dragged into the administration and the challenges and so on, then often we lose sight of what we're actually trying to do. Lovely example, I think, of radiologists. So interpreting X-rays, and it's a study that showed over about 2,000 different scans, that if you include a picture of the person that the scan is of, rather than just the negatives, rather than just the X-rays themselves, the diagnosis rate went up by about 43% in this particular study. Wow, really, can I see who's benefiting from this? Or there was an example of an organization where people were on the phone to try and get people to donate to a scholarship fund so that people could attend university. And they had we were able to split this group into two, and in one group they had sort of senior leadership of the university that they were working for come in and motivate them, tell them how important they were to what they do. And then the other group had somebody that was a beneficiary of the scholarship. And they came in and talked about the benefit that having an education had made to them, and that now they're able to give back. And the people that had the scholarship person coming in and talk to them, in the next period that they measured it for, brought in 3 times more of the donations than the people that had the pep talk from the management team. It's not that the management team isn't important. It's not that the management team shouldn't be motivating. It shouldn't be supportive. But it's a real difference when you see who we're benefiting from. So look at the, organizational level, cause, individual level, who benefits from what I do, and keep reminding ourselves, keep going back to that. Why on earth am I doing this? And then the third one, then, emotion, huge topic. Let me touch on just a little bit. I want to attempt to play a little video. Let's see how we go with this. There's no audio in the video. It's very short. So Alex Ferguson is sitting in the middle. These are people watching football. I don't actually watch football really myself, but I like the video. So these people are sitting watching a football game, probably the most important thing to them in their lives at this moment, at least. What's going on here? So this is a slowed down version of it. The balloon comes in, they're busy watching the game. What happens? Oh, there's an interrupt. I love the guy on the right hand side, hand on his chest. Well, this is, of course, if a balloon bangs next to you, you're going to turn around and look, aren't you? It's obviously the case. But it's a very simple example of where we don't get to control what goes on in our experience. At least momentarily, we are affected by something, and we had no ability to be not affected by it. And here I think there's absolutely a paradox with emotion. That on one hand, if we think we are entirely in control of our experience, of our inner experience, of our emotional experience, if we think we're in control of that, actually that can lead to real challenges. Because, of course, we struggle, we feel bad. Have you ever felt in a way you didn't want to feel? Have you ever said something you wish you hadn't said? Have you ever done something you wish you hadn't done? I've not met anybody yet that's been able to say no to those things. Of course. Well, if we are completely in control, why would we do that? We're not in control of some aspects of our physiology. And there's good reason for that, by the way. The example of the reactivity from the balloon popping, well, that's a safety measure. But there's a lot of that going on in us. So there's a real paradox here. If you think you're in control, then you end up blaming yourself when things don't go the way you'd like. When you realize, no, there were some things I don't get to control. So what I'd really like to do is be able to work with those things. Then we start to see things a bit differently. Then we have a very different way of looking at things like emotion in our lives. So there's a real paradox with emotion, I think. One other thing that helps us, I think, look at emotion for a second. 4 beautiful people all smiling at us. But if you look at the smiles, there are 2 of them that seem a bit more genuine than 2 of the others. And it's not very difficult, I don't think, to see the girl on the very left-hand side, the guy on the left-hand side. Both of them are smiling because they've been asked to smile. The lady and the gent on the right-hand side both look like they mean to smile. You can tell, can't you? And it's this odd thing where we tell people to think positively. And by the way, in many ways, I'm not going to suggest that you shouldn't think positively, but like every phrase, you need to understand when and where and how. There's some subtlety to it. There always is. And in fact, we know that fake positive thinking, pretending to, in fact, to be in a particular state when we're really not, actually causes challenges for us. And so, in fact, there is a phrase called emotional labor, which is used to describe the situations, in fact, very often with customer-facing staff, or maybe managers, in fact, who have to put on a brave face, when actually inside what they feel is very different from what they're purveying on the outside. If you're in customer service and the customer is very unhappy, and you have to represent the company well, then you have to work, you have to really in control of what's going on. And there's a level of skill with that. But also, if there's nothing else going on in your life, that can cause real problems in the long run. So yeah, we should be able to, yes, we can look at things with an optimistic perspective, but let's not get that skewed. Let's not, go down, no, you have to think positive. You know what? You don't always have to think positive. What's very helpful to do is really see how things are working for me so that I can do something useful with them. That's a much more helpful perspective. So emotion is incredibly powerful. We are fundamentally emotional. We are social beings. And even the most logical, hard-headed, business person, actually, all those decisions you're making, it's because you have the skill of emotion in order to make decisions. It's part of all of us. But maybe, again, preaching to the converted here. So I think that, you sort of gather this emotional skills, the ability to understand what's going on in emotion, the ability to practice it, experiment. This is how we learn, right? You need to be able to practice emotional skills. Helps develop emotional resilience or emotional intelligence. How do we do that in the workplace? Well, actually, simply trust inside the organization, or trust inside the team, at least, that I work in, has an enormous impact on how straightforward this is. If I know that I can come back to the people that I'm working with and have a conversation, man, this is really difficult, I'm struggling here, whatever it may be, then that's a big impact on how I can develop the skills of being resilient in the face of challenges. And often we think, no, it's about hardness. It's about absolutely being, no, it's not, you know what? So that works for some things, but actually much more broadly in life. And our pandemic, I think, has reminded us many times of this. It's much more about having a trusting environment, the ability to have a conversation. So I'm going to pick just 3 things in a very short amount of time. Then I'm going to say 3 keys: work and well-being, look for a cause in the organization, but also at an individual level who benefits from what I do. And then emotional intelligence, the ability to work with and develop the skills of emotion. I think are incredibly helpful for developing this process and the skills and the mindsets and the support for resilience. Thank you. I realize I didn't give time for conversation here, but I want to leave a minute or 2 at the end, if there was a question that's come from here.
Any questions from the audience?
Mark, can I ask?
Jill?
Do people ask you to come in and think about their resilience, or is it sort of framed differently and you have to sort of dig underneath? How do people engage with you?
Well, to be honest, it's probably both of those things. There is very often it is a case of, well, can we come in and looking at our well-being and our resilience processes? Can we do that? Sometimes it's coming in as an individual to coach individuals in an organization. So it does vary across organizations. Some are sort of very, you might say, very enlightened, and maybe that's represented by the organizations here. It's coming, yeah, let's just support us with this. We want to improve our resilience. And for some, it's very much more a backdoor approach. Yeah.
So which part of an organisation thinks about resilience? You know, I ask because, you know, you might think it'd be the finance guys, you might think it'd be HR, but HR doesn't normally think in terms of resilience, in my experience. So can you sort of...
Yeah, no, and I think there's an unfortunate requirement in many ways. HR has to also do a whole bunch of legal things and so on. It does kind of change, unfortunately, the roles that some people have to play in those places. So I guess I'm mostly engaged by the business leaders. So in actually some organizations, it is absolutely the HR person, typically smaller organizations. But often it's the head of a particular piece of business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the director or something along those lines. Look, I want someone to come in and help my team work with this, or my department work with this.
Okay.
Or often working with small organizations, often it is a founder in those.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because they are the people that, particularly when it comes to organizational resilience, they have a direct impact on it. They founded it as based on their values. And so it would make sense that, you know, that is quite often the entry point.
And I think some of the really enlightened people I've met also realise I've not created the culture that I wanted to create. and in my ways I quite like that perspective, because there's a real openness then to, okay, so what can we do? And that's you know, a really nice attitude to have, I think. Yeah.
Super, brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Mark. Excellent session. A lot of areas for thought there. And again, if you have questions, perhaps they come up later and you haven't had time to ask them, do put them down in the chat window or just send them to us and we'll get them to Mark.